My parents made me rewrite my book report 27 times for getting an A+, while my sister got Disney World for failing 3 classes. 20 years later, she destroyed their business, left them homeless with $800,000 in debt, then showed up at my door, demanding I pay the $40,000. She owed some very dangerous people. My parents groomed me and my younger sister Blake from the second we were born, but not in the way you're thinking. You see, they programmed Blake to believe effort was beneath her. Meanwhile, I was nothing but a failure who needed to be fixed. When I got a 99% on my spelling test at age 7, my mom made me write the word I missed 500 times. Perfection is the only option, she said, ripping up my test. And that same week, Blake brought home a 67% and they took her out for ice cream. She tried her best, Dad explained. When I started crying, he made me write, I will not cry over excellence 100 times. Your sister doesn't need perfection. You do. But compared to my dad's revision sessions, none of this was even that bad. It all started the day I turned 10 years old. Instead of a birthday party, he handed me my book report from school. I'd gotten an A+. I found 12 ways this could be better, he said. I spent my entire birthday rewriting it. He found 15 more problems. We did this for 3 days straight until I collapsed at my desk. While I rewrote that report 27 times, Blake was at Disney World. She'd failed 3 classes but needed a break from stress. From there, everything I touched had to be perfect. Piano practice meant playing until my fingers bled. One wrong note meant starting the entire piece over. Blake quit piano after 2 lessons because it hurt her hands. When I won the state mathematics competition, my parents made me solve every problem I'd gotten right again to prove it wasn't luck. When Blake failed algebra, they hired me to do her homework. To help your sister succeed, they said. While I spent every weekend redoing assignments that already had perfect scores, Blake spent hers shopping with their credit cards. Because I was lucky, my obsessive practice had accidentally made me valuable. Tutoring kids, editing essays, building websites, perfect work commanded perfect prices. So by the time I turned 18, I had $15,000 saved that my parents didn't know about. When I told them I was leaving for MIT, my mom shredded my acceptance letter. You'll stay here and try again for Harvard. I left with my savings and a duffel bag. Meanwhile, Blake became everything they'd enabled, a professional failure who blamed everyone else, bouncing between their couch and their bank account. They had so much faith in her potential that they gave her their company to run. And as for me, well, I was erased from the family story like a first draft, but I'd gaff LOL, because just last year, I was promoted to vice president of engineering, multiple 6 figures, stock options, corner office. I almost called them to share the news. Then I remembered they never saved my number, and I never saw my parents again, until 10 months later, that is. I was debugging code at 3 a.m. when my old phone buzzed. It was my mom. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Sophia, we need your help. Blake, she destroyed everything. What do you mean destroyed? The business is gone. She drained every account, maxed out the business credit lines, sold our client list to competitors. We're in debt for $800,000. I sat up and stayed silent as she continued. Yesterday, we got eviction papers. The house has 3 mortgages we didn't know about. She had power of attorney. She took everything. Dad took the phone. We're 68 years old and living in our car. Our friends won't return our calls. They think we were in on it. Please, Sophia, you're all we have left. The next day, I met them at a truck stop diner. They looked broken. Dad's hair completely white now. Mom wearing the same clothes she'd worn to Blake's middle school graduation. When I handed them my business card, VP of engineering, Dad's hands trembled. You made it, he whispered. Without us, despite us. I paid for a motel, 1 month, set them up with temp work through my network. Basic survival, nothing more. Mom grabbed my hand when I turned to leave. We demanded perfection from the wrong daughter. No, I said. You demanded perfection from the right daughter. It's the only reason I survived. When I got home that night, Blake was in my apartment. Turns out, destroying our parents wasn't enough, because she had new debts. More specifically, $40,000 she owed to some very unforgiving people. People who knew where I lived. People who knew my route to work. She made it clear that my options were writing a check or finding out how imperfect life could get. So I poured her wine and told her I'd need to sell some stock. Smiled as she sprawled on my couch like she owned it. But when she finally left, I felt something I'd been trained to feel my whole life. The need to fix another person's mess. Because I spent my entire childhood perfecting everything I touched. But I never knew that my greatest test would be perfecting my revenge. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My hands moved with practiced precision as I opened my laptop and created a new folder, Blake documentation. Every text, every threat, every detail about these people she owed money to. I screenshot everything. My phone buzzed. Blake again. She wanted to meet at noon to discuss payment arrangements. I agreed, then immediately drove to the bank. The teller recognized me from my weekly deposits and smiled. I withdrew $500 in small bills and requested a cashier's check for $39,500 made out to Blake Montgomery. The teller's eyebrows raised slightly, but she processed it without questions. Back at my apartment, I set up my old phone to record, placed it strategically on the bookshelf between 2 engineering manuals. Then I waited. Blake arrived 15 minutes early, which surprised me. She looked worse than the night before. Dark circles under her eyes, hair unwashed, wearing what appeared to be the same clothes. She paced my living room, picking up and examining my things like she was cataloging their value. I handed her the cashier's check. Her eyes widened as she saw the amount. Almost $40,000, just shy of what she claimed to need. She looked at me suspiciously. It's all I could liquidate quickly, I explained, keeping my voice steady. The rest is tied up in restricted stock options. I can get you the other $500 by Friday. She studied the check, turning it over in her hands. This better better not bounce. It won't, but I need something from you first. Her jaw tightened. You're not really in a position to negotiate. I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot of my banking app. The balance showed another $50,000 available. I could get you more, enough to leave town, start fresh somewhere, but I need to know these people won't come after me once you pay them. Blake's eyes locked onto the screen. I watched the calculations happening behind them. $40,000 to pay her debts, $50,000 to disappear with. She'd always been predictable when money was involved. Fine, she said. I'll introduce you to them. You can pay them directly if you want. Make sure they know the debt's cleared. I shook my head. Number, you take the check, you pay them, and you bring me proof. A receipt, a text, something that shows it's done. Then we can discuss the rest. She folded the check and slipped it into her pocket. You always were too careful. That's why you'll never really live, Sophia. You just exist in your perfect little bubble. After she left, I retrieved my phone from the bookshelf and saved the recording. Then I made 3 copies, storing them in different cloud services. My parents had taught me to be thorough, after all. That afternoon, I drove to the motel where my parents were staying. Dad answered the door in a maintenance uniform from the job I'd arranged. Mom sat on the bed, sorting through job applications I'd printed for her. I sat down and pulled out my laptop. I need to tell you something about Blake. They exchanged glances. Mom's hands stilled on the papers. She came to my apartment last night. She owes $40,000 to some dangerous people. She threatened me. Dad's face went pale. Mom covered her mouth with her hand. I gave her a check this morning, I continued, but I need you to know what's happening in case something goes wrong. We should call the police, Mom said immediately. With what proof? She's careful with her words, and these people she owes, they're not the type who appreciate police attention. Dad stood up and walked to the window. His shoulders sagged. This is our fault. We created this. Yes, I agreed. You did. The words hung in the air between us. Mom started crying quietly. I closed my laptop and stood to leave. Wait, Dad said. What are you going to do? What you trained me to do. Fix it. Perfectly. That evening, Blake texted me a photo. It showed her with 2 men in what looked like a parking garage. One of them was holding the cashier's check. The timestamp showed 6:47 p.m. 15 minutes later, she sent another text. Debt cleared. When can we discuss the rest? I told her to give me a week to liquidate more assets. She agreed, probably already spending the money in her mind. Over the next 3 days, I maintained my normal routine. Went to work, attended meetings, led my team through a critical product launch. But every evening, I worked on my real project. I pulled every record I could find of Blake's past schemes. College transcripts showing plagiarized papers, employment records from jobs she'd been fired from, a trail of broken leases and unpaid debts. My phone had been recording every interaction with her for years, a habit I'd developed in college when she'd started blaming me for her failures. I had hundreds of files, her admitting to stealing from our parents, her bragging about manipulating bosses, her detailed descriptions of how she'd destroyed the family business. On Thursday, she texted again. She was getting impatient. The people she'd paid off had given her a taste for what $50,000 could buy. Talk about family dynamics that make reality TV look boring. One kid gets ice cream for failing while the other writes punishment lines for getting 99%. She wanted to meet tomorrow. I agreed, then made another trip to the bank. This time, I withdrew $2,000 in cash. The teller, the same one from before, looked concerned. Everything all right, Ms. Montgomery? Family emergency, I said. It's complicated. She nodded sympathetically and processed the withdrawal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, reviewing everything I'd compiled. The evidence was overwhelming, but evidence of what? Being a terrible person wasn't illegal. Destroying our parents through legal means wasn't criminal. Even her threats to me were carefully worded, implying rather than stating. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Your sister paid in full. No problems here. But she's been talking. Says you're good for more. Much more. My blood ran cold. I screenshot the message and added it to my documentation folder. The next morning, Blake showed up early again. This time, she'd made an effort. Hair styled, makeup done, wearing what looked like a new outfit. The $40,000 had already changed her. So, she said, settling onto my couch like she owned it. About that $50,000, I sat across from her, keeping my expression neutral. There's a problem. Her smile faltered. What kind of problem? The kind where your friends sent me a message last night. Seems you've been talking about my finances. She waved her hand dismissively. So what? They're not going to do anything. You're my sister. The sister you threatened. The sister you extorted $40,000 from. That sister? Her eyes narrowed. You gave me that money willingly. I never threatened you. I pulled out my phone and played a portion of our first conversation. Her voice filled the room. My options were writing a check or finding out how imperfect life could get. The color drained from her face. You recorded me? Every conversation for the past 5 years. It started when you tried to blame me for your plagiarism scandal in college. Remember that? She stood up, pacing now. That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent. One-party consent state, I said calmly. I looked it up years ago. She whirled on me. What do you want? I want you to leave. Get out of town. Stay away from me and our parents. Take the $40,000 and disappear. Or what? You'll play those recordings for someone? Who cares? It's just family drama. I opened my laptop and showed her the folder I'd compiled. Her face went white as she recognized document after document. The employment records, the forged signatures, the fraudulent loan applications. I'm not going to do anything with these, I said, as long as you leave and don't come back. But if you or your friends come near me again, if you contact our parents, if you even think about running another scheme, I'll make sure every future employer, every landlord, every person you try to con knows exactly who you are. She sank back onto the couch. For the first time in our lives, Blake looked defeated. You planned this, she whispered. You gave me that money knowing I'd do this. No, I said. I gave you that money hoping you'd just leave. But I prepared for this because you taught me to. Every time you blamed me, every time you made me the villain in your story, you taught me to protect myself. She stood up slowly, her usual bravado gone. I need the $50,000 50,000 to really start over. Number, you got 40. That's more than most people see in a year. Make it work. Or what? You'll ruin me? She laughed bitterly. You're just like them, you know, demanding perfection, controlling everything. I'm exactly like them, I agreed. They made me this way. The difference is, I use it to build things. You use it to tear them down. She headed for the door, then paused. What about mom and dad? What about them? Are you going to help them? Really help them? That's none of your concern anymore. She left without another word. I watched from my window as she got into her car, a hit-up sedan that didn't match her new clothes. She sat there for a long time before finally driving away. I waited until her taillights disappeared around the corner before returning to my laptop. The unknown numbers text still glowed on my screen. Blake had given them my information, just as I'd expected. My fingers moved across the keyboard, documenting this new development in my growing file. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. I transferred most of my savings to a new account at a different bank, one Blake wouldn't know about. Changed all my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication on everything, even installed new locks on my apartment door. Years of perfecting systems had taught me to anticipate every vulnerability. Monday morning arrived with another text from Blake. She needed to see me urgently. Something about complications with the payment. I ignored it and went to work, but concentration proved impossible. My team noticed my distraction during our morning stand-up meeting. I deflected their concerns and buried myself in code reviews. Blake showed up at my office building during lunch. Security called up to inform me I had a visitor. I watched her on the lobby cameras through my phone app, saw her pacing near the elevators, gesturing wildly to the security guard. After 10 minutes, she gave up and left. That evening, I found her waiting in my apartment building's parking garage. She'd been crying, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her new outfit was wrinkled, one heel broken. She rushed toward my car as I pulled into my spot. I locked my doors and called building security. She pounded on my window while I waited. 5 minutes later, 2 guards escorted her off the property. I filed an incident report and requested increased patrols. The next morning brought a call from my parents' motel. The manager informed me they'd checked out early. No forwarding address. I drove there immediately, found their room cleaned out. The desk clerk mentioned a young woman had picked them up around midnight. The description matched Blake perfectly. I spent the rest of the day trying to reach them. Their phones went straight to voicemail. The temp agency confirmed they hadn't shown up for work. By evening, I'd checked every motel within a 50-mile radius. Nothing. Blake's text came at 9 p.m. A photo of my parents sitting in what looked like a storage unit. They appeared unharmed but confused. The message was simple: 50,000 or they stay with me. I screenshot everything and added it to my documentation. Then I called the only person I could think of who might help. My college roommate Catherine, now a social worker. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. Catherine arrived at my apartment within an hour. We spent the night strategizing. She made calls to Adult Protective Services, explained the options. Without proof of immediate danger, intervention would be limited. We needed my parents to ask for help themselves. The next day, I went back to work and pretended everything was normal. Led meetings, reviewed code, approved budgets, but I'd set my phone to record every incoming call. Blake tried 3 times. I let them all go to voicemail. Her messages grew increasingly frantic. The people she'd paid wanted more money. They knew she'd gotten it from family. They expected another payment. She needed the 50,000 immediately. I maintained my silence. Catherine checked in throughout the day, updating me on her efforts to locate my parents through official channels. No luck yet, but she'd filed reports with the appropriate agencies. That evening, I stopped by the bank again, withdrew another 1,000 in cash, then asked to speak with a manager about fraud prevention. Spent an hour documenting Blake's attempts to access my accounts. They flagged her information in their system. Blake appeared at my apartment again that night. This time, she'd brought my parents. I watched through my doorbell camera as she propped them against the hallway wall. They looked exhausted, confused. Mom clutched a small suitcase. Dad stared at the floor. I called Catherine first, then building security. Documented everything through the camera app. Blake rang the doorbell repeatedly, then started kicking the door. My parents just stood there, not saying anything. Security arrived quickly this time. I'd shown them the incident report from the parking garage. They approached carefully, asked Blake to leave. She gestured wildly at my parents, insisting they needed to see me. The guards looked uncertain. I opened the door but kept the chain on, made eye contact with my parents. Mom started crying immediately. Dad just looked tired. I asked them directly if they wanted to come inside. They both nodded. Blake exploded, screaming about family loyalty, about everything she'd done for them. Security moved between us as I unchained the door and let my parents in. Blake tried to follow, but the guards blocked her. She threatened to wait in the hallway all night. I closed the door and turned to my parents. They stood in my entryway like lost children. Mom still crying, Dad examining my engineering awards on the wall. I guided them to the living room, got them water, waited for them to speak. The story came out in fragments. Blake had convinced them I was in danger, that the people she owed would hurt me if they didn't help. She'd driven them around for 2 days, staying in different motels, always moving. They'd spent their own money, what little they had, believing they were protecting me. I showed them Blake's texts, the photo from the storage unit, the demands for money. Mom's face crumpled as she realized the manipulation. Dad just nodded slowly, like he'd expected this all along. Catherine arrived while they were still processing. She brought paperwork, resources, options, explained their rights, the services available. My parents listened numbly. 20 minutes into her presentation, Blake started pounding on the door again. This time I called the police. The way Blake just used their parents as pawns makes me wonder what kind of twisted logic is running through her head right